Hello, everybody. I'm Donna Anderson, author of lovefraud.com. And today I'm with Caroline Solo. Caroline is a family law attorney in Queensland, Australia, and she is soon going to be presenting a webinar for us, which is called Take Back Your Throne, Reclaim Your Power in Family Court Cross-Examination. So welcome, Caroline. I'm so glad to talk to you today.
Thanks, Donna. Happy to be here.
Okay, so why is it so scary for people to go to family court against an abusive ex?
So, Donna, I think going to court is difficult for anybody. But when you've been subject to family violence, you have a particular vulnerability to abuse, essentially, obviously. And when you go to court, often what happens, the manner of questions, the style of questions in cross-examination mimics the abuse that you may have received at the hands of your abusive ex-spouse.
So that just like triggers everything that you felt when you were with the person.
Correct. So yeah. They call it re-traumatization, essentially. You feel that fear again.
Okay, so can you briefly explain your analogy about the king or queen and the general?
So there's been a lot of research recently about the impact on the brain of family violence. And what they found is that when the brain feels threatened, whether it's by an abusive spouse or say by a tiger, for example, the brain goes into survival mode. I think our listeners have probably heard about fight, flight, or flee. So that survival mode is a situation where your logical brain stops working and your survival brain takes over. It's called the amygdala hijack. And what happens when your amygdala is hijacked is that your brain stops storing memories. The hippocampus, which is the area for storing memories, stops working, and instead it sends cortisol to all the areas of your body so that you can either fight or flee or freeze. These kind of terms, I think, are quite difficult to envisage or imagine. So I used an analogy of the queen, the king, and the general to explain that when your logical brain is hijacked, essentially the logical king or queen who is making decisions is no longer in control. Mm-hmm. The survival brain, which we call the general, I've called the general, is actually determining what happens to you and how you react. So the reason you need to kind of remember this and be able to visualize it is that when you're in cross-examination, what you want is to make sure the king or the queen is on the throne. Mm-hmm. In other words, your logical brain is answering the questions. They're in control of your bodily functions, not survival brain, because survival brain will just react quite instinctively, sometimes defensively, sometimes evasively. So in cross-examination, what we want is for you to have your logical brain at the forefront. Your king or queen needs to be on the throne.
That's a great analogy. I think people will find it really helpful. So how else will your webinar help people who are going to be facing cross-examination in family court?
So the webinar, as you know, is for people who are represented or people who are unrepresented. In either case, there's still a lot of research being done on this area. So sometimes attorneys may not be aware of the particular vulnerabilities of survivors of family violence. So what this webinar is designed to do is to give you some tools to face cross-examination, bearing in mind that the way you react may be different to how other people may react. People who haven't been subject to domestic violence and whose brain do not automatically go into survival mode when they feel threatened. So it's intended to plug some gaps in knowledge and also arm you with the tools to be able to answer the questions as calmly as you possibly can.
Okay, and I just want to clarify, this isn't only for people who have experienced physical violence, it's also for emotional and psychological trauma as well?
Absolutely. The brain processes psychological and emotional violence in the same way it processes physical violence, which is it sees it as a threat. And when that threat is repeated over and over again, it can manifest as complex trauma, which is the vulnerability that you face when you've been faced with that for many years.
Okay, well, I think this is wonderful. I know that you've got lots and lots of good information and it's going to be really helpful. So we're looking forward to the webinar.
Me too. Thanks, Donna.
Okay, thank you.